Formally kick this off. All right, I'm Peter Jewett. This is Accessible Web Office Hours. Today we're talking about ADA Title II. It's April 23rd, 2026 today, and we were going to be talking about the deadline. It was looming tomorrow, but it's now been extended. And today we are joined by Mike from Kesz1 Technologies. Um, to have this discussion. And Mike, why don't you give us a little intro on who you are, what your agency does?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for having me. I'm Mike again from Kesz1 Technologies. So it's we've been in business since 2000, technically 1999. We do a number of different we have a number of different services in pharma, higher ed, and government. We have a number of in-house solutions, and then we also do consulting, design development, and ADA compliance, which is where we got connected, Peter.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. All right, so like we just said, it's April 23rd, the deadline for the ADA compliance for government, state, local, counties. ADA Title II was supposed to be April 24th, tomorrow, and it has been extended by a year. So that means that jurisdictions with greater than 50,000 population get until April 26 of 2027. And then the smaller jurisdictions also get another year, which pushes them out to April 20 something of 2028. So I guess, Michael, you're kind of really actively working with these counties. How have folks been? What before they knew the deadline was being extended, what was the general approach you were taking with folks to help them achieve this deadline?
So it's been different everywhere. So at the county and at the state level, some of the counties have been proactive. We've had certain clients that we've been doing this for over a year in preparation. Some are, right now or as of last week, we're trying to find a solution. Um, it really, the push of the deadline, I think gives them an opportunity to now be prepared, right? So now instead of rushing together and just trying to find a solution and do something to be compliant, which I have to say is very difficult to begin with, because there's a lot of moving parts, as you guys know. And for someone that isn't used to it or understands it, it's a huge mountain to climb. So what I think is a good thing about the push to the deadline, it makes it puts it on everyone's calendar. Now they have to plan and they have to implement a solution. So, like what I was saying before, a lot have been prepared, and we've had clients that haven't lost any sleep over this, and then we've had a handful that have. And I again, the relief is the pushback, and I'm not really sure I like the word deadline either. I think that if that's something that I wanted to just bring up where it's more of like a baseline for compliancy, to be compliant. Because this is something that's constantly changing, constantly moving. Content is constantly changing. So to reach that, max level of 100 is extremely difficult with different type of websites that are just fluid and constantly changing. So the term deadline, I think, adds just a level of scarcity to the whole situation, which isn't good. I don't think it doesn't help because people then become too fearful to find a solution and move forward. So, again, some clients have been very prepared for it, took the steps of implementation, already had an infrastructure in place, which I think is huge also. Some clients have legacy systems, have legacy websites, legacy, they're not even sure how to make changes at that compliant level. So that's kind of the challenges that we faced, and the conversations we've had was it's not like, okay, let's get you ADA compliant. Let's see where you are right now.
Yep.
Because we might not even be able to get you, well, now that the deadline's pushed back, which is great, but to get you to where you need to be at the time. So those are some of the kind of the issues that we're running into.
Yeah, I love the idea of progress over looking at a deadline. We had,
Yeah,
we try to look at compliance as a whole is not a line you're trying to cross at some point, but is a commitment you're making over time.
right.
So finding the right set of tools, finding the right internal resources, finding the right, the amount of budget, and obviously refining that budget over time. So really thinking about compliance as an ongoing thing is super helpful.
Yeah.
Um,
And one of the conversations we do have is, now how do we avoid this in 27? How do we
yeah,
avoid
right.
this? And then like we were saying, how do we phase these things in?
Yep.
So we're ready at that term of that deadline term, and
Yep.
everyone's prepared. And like you said, it's using the tools, getting them in place if we can, and then helping guide, either in-house or outsourced to get to where they need to be.
Yeah, that whole reality of somebody having to do the work is a major bottleneck for these projects. Somebody in the organization, or an outside partner, um, like Kesz1 needs to be assigned to doing the actual upgrade work, and this does require work. There's no
Yeah.
magic bullet that you can hit. And on the topic of like ongoing accessibility versus one time, there's certainly like a one-time project that needs to be done. Been kind of calling it like a softball moving through a garden hose. There's
Yep.
definitely this one-time budget that needs to be allocated to hit this deadline. Um, but the budgeting conversation is super interesting. Like we talked to folks even back 2 years ago now, when this deadline first kind of came out, we had someone contact us within, I think, a couple weeks, that said, "Yeah, 2 years sounds like a lot of time, but you've got to understand, I've got to get my budget together, Peter, and I've got to get my budget planned and submitted so that it can be approved and go into effect in July." July 1,
Right.
we reset our fiscal budget for the year. So I really have July 2024 to June 2025 as year one. And I
Right.
need to get some budget in short order that I don't think is going to be like the big budget, but I need to use I need some number, Peter, from Accessible Web on what year one looks like. And then the recommendation we came up with together with the client was, look at accessible web fees, look at a third party that can do the remediation work and support you. You're going to need some extra hands on deck doing the dev work. And then look at internal resources that can be trained up long term because this needs to be sustainable. And then
Right.
based on that year one, how that rolled out. And again, this was someone that was super on top of it. They then budgeted towards the end of, spring 2025 as they were setting up their July 2025 to June 2026 budget.
Right.
They had some math they could do. They knew, generally they'd done an inventory, they audited and remediated a subset of the websites that they had responsibility over. And so then they
Hmm.
were able to extrapolate out that number for their 2025 to June 2026 budget. And then once you've done that big bulk of work, anyone that has worked in government and knows what the budgeting process looks like, it's a lot easier to get, it's less stressful, more consistent. You can plan better when you have an ongoing budget in place instead of having to go back every year for a big slug of cash. Getting a budget that is based in historic data, um, that can help you, that can get, maybe incrementally increased as costs go up, inflation and whatnot, year over year, but having a consistent budget that is going to support the ongoing accessibility efforts that you have so that you can do the work long term. So yeah,
Right.
that was someone that was super on top of it. And then the thing we've been finding now too is everyone in this space is seeing the folks that are showing up last minute, and certainly they're behind the ball, but I say this all the time on the webinars, I say it all the time, but like best place to Best time to plant trees 20 years ago, second best time is today. So, the
Yep.
number one thing for anyone that might just be seeing this is get started. Find a good partner that has expertise in this. Get started on figuring out what the inventory looks like so you know what the budget ask needs to look like. And then find a partner, find a tool set like Accessible Web Ramp where you can get a baseline. Getting that baseline, if you don't know where you are, you can't
Yep.
understand how to realistically get to where you're trying to be. So find a tool like Accessible Web Ramp that can do a baseline scan, help you create the inventory of pages that need to be audited, and then just get started. Even if you have a small budget today, even if you have to borrow some amount from the IT budget or maybe other departments or programs, it doesn't take a ton of money to get started. If
Right.
you do it right, it doesn't take a huge amount of money to maintain it over time, but you need to figure out how to get from where you're at to where you need to be.
Yeah, I agree. That's well said. I think next week's webinar we can do government procurement and the hurdles that we have there, and I'm sure everyone on this would agree.
Yeah, yeah,
But that's how, it's right. And if I could just say one other thing about the tools, we've had clients with large state agency budgets, utilizing or trying to just get something in place and using free scanners or whatever. And from my experience, that wastes time, that wastes budget, that wastes money because now, you can send it to a partner and, that could try to do the work and just the data that we're looking at and the remediation and everything. Now we're doing more work and trying to figure out because it's not as detailed, and again, we've
classic.
we've
Yeah,
looked at every solution and we've had every solution come to us.
yeah,
And just to maximize time and effort and money, Accessible Web gives us the remediation, gives us what pages, lets
yeah,
us run a scan right there. So it helps. You're right. Like getting over just implementing something,
yeah.
and from a cost perspective, it's extremely affordable, knowing what is on the other side of not being compliant.
Yep.
Basically.
Yeah. And we've tried to make, ramp approximately is like $20 per website per
Yep.
month. And we are trying to be a solution to this approach of cobbling together 10 free tools and everyone's passing reports around from these different vendors that all have different results, right? We were
Yeah.
joking earlier about someone scanning a firewall page. We see people scanning
Yeah.
login pages that they're doing their best. They're trying to make progress with limited budget, but I can't count the number of times I've sat on a meeting with 10 employees, 10 folks that are on payroll getting paid,
Right.
and they're wringing their hands about, a $600 a month tool. And you
Yeah.
look around the room and you add up the cost of a meeting
Yeah.
with 10 people, and you're like, guys, this is the
Yep.
$600 right here, and we're gonna leave this with no
No
solution
solution. Yeah.
forward. So,
Right.
yeah, trying to come up with one tool helps keep everyone on the same page. Ramp also helps document the work. Like, no one's going to be perfect. Accessibility is never perfect. There's no realistic finish line. We very, very rarely see clients at Accessible Web that um, can remediate all the accessibility issues that we find. There's third parties, there's issues as legacy software.
Yeah.
Um, but with Ramp, you can document the progress you're making. You can easily make progress. There's tasks in there, remediation recommendations and tasks that arguably anyone with website access and some level of technical skill can start tackling. And with Ramp, you can document it all, and you have one report. You have one place to
Yeah.
look to document that progress, so it's not 40 different free tools flying
Right.
around.
You know what's great about Ramp, with our experience of it, some clients do have the capability to do things on their own,
Yep,
with the tools in-house or whatever. And then what they can do with Ramp is create the task and assign it to us.
yep,
So then we can easily get the notification. We go in, instead of
yep,
filtering through or, stepping on each other's toes, we know exactly what we need to do. We close it out. They know. And I can tell you this morning, we might have sent 8 reports out from Ramp on
yep,
scores to clients
yep,
easily. So
yep.
it's yeah, turnkey, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, what conversations do you have with clients? like the digital assets that a government or school district, a county has, there's kind of a mix of internal websites, intranets,
Yep,
tools that they've built and maintain internally. And then there's all the third-party tools that they contract with. Maybe it's a property, a mapping database of property
yep,
values and the different lots around a town. So obviously the stuff internally that the government, the organization needs to figure out how to fix it internally or find a partner to fix it. Um, how often are you working with companies on the third party tools that they have? Do you have any recommendations for those?
On those, so a couple of our accounts, it's been brought to us. Like you've mentioned, the GIS systems, those some we run into a couple of hurdles with the third party data collection. So, those forms that can be embedded into into
Yep.
sites.
Yep.
Um, those iframes aren't compliant. So another solution has to be provided for that. So we'll work directly with them. And then it's really up to the agency to know which systems need to be scanned. Anything public facing, is a top priority also. But our third party systems that we use, we've run through Accessible Web as well. And that's what our recommendation is to the clients too. Anything that's out there that the public can get to needs to be ADA compliant.
Yep. And I love you just hit on something really important for folks that are starting to chip away at this, right? Where do I get started? I've got this huge inventory that all need to be accessible. We definitely recommend, it sounds like you're on the same page with starting with the kind of most critical functionality, and the functionality that is public facing, right? Like your number one uh, responsibility is for the citizens in your jurisdiction, right?
Right.
And so looking at, Google Analytics, looking at just the critical functions of your website versus the nice to have stuff.
Yeah.
And starting where you can make the most impact is where we always try to start the work, and then move
Right.
into kind of the tool from 10 years ago that
Yep.
probably everyone thinks needs to be rebuilt, but there's one dude that shows up three
Right.
times
We
a
had one
year.
this morning. It was a form going to a Perl script.
Yep,
I couldn't believe that still exists.
yep,
But to go back to your point, which is great, the starting point, because we have a lot that are just like we don't know where to start. We don't
yep,
know what websites are public facing. So
yeah,
we've actually asked a couple of our clients to, look at their register.com. What
yep,
domains do you have?
yeah,
Like go to Network Solutions. What do you
yep,
have registered? And
yep,
then let's start with that. So at least we have a list of,
yep,
10, 15 links that we can then go through and say, okay, these are high priority.
yep.
We've done that, which has helped.
There's tools too we've used in the past, where you can look up the DNS records, right, for
Yeah.
network solutions or whatever. But there's
Yep.
there's public, even without logging into the registrar, there's public tools that you can ping the DNS of a state.gov
Yep.
website, and find all the subdomains, which has been
Yeah.
super helpful. That's pretty quick to find.
Right.
Um, and then just using sometimes to like Screaming Frog or a tool like that
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
will
Yeah.
crawl through a website. We found that to be wicked helpful. Just look through the links of the main state.gov website,
Right.
city.gov website, and then identify the different key subdirectories and subdomains that exist.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, finding that inventory is definitely like if you do nothing else as you're trying to figure out how to get started, the easiest first step that arguably anyone can take, that needs to be taken is definitely creating that inventory.
Correct. Yeah. You have to know what you need to work on.
How do you help customers prioritize or make decisions around repair versus rebuild or replace
That's a
type of
great
decision?
question. That comes down to budget.
Yeah.
And then that really comes down to like the discovery. What is our environment? What are we working in? SharePoint, very difficult. Just customization. It just takes a lot of money and resources to make updates and changes to a SharePoint site.
Yeah.
Then you have the more flexible WordPress and those. So, kind of discovering what we're working with and then what's the best path for just remediation now, getting where you need to be, but then maintaining that. So, is it worth the initial investment to update and get a website compliant that's a legacy website, that's
Mhm.
running on a legacy server, legacy compilers, that sort of thing? Or, do we do an upgrade and in that process, you become ADA compliant in the process? This could be a great opportunity for those systems that they've always been put off for that upgrade because you get the ADA compliance at the same time. And
Yep.
like you're doing it at the same time, so it's easier, more cost efficient because as you're building the pages, building the templates, building, you're more conscious of the ADA compliant part of it.
Right, right. Yeah, doing it early, right? Working the
Yeah.
accessibility into a new build is always, always, always the best time to be thinking about accessibility. And
Yep.
obviously, you need to be, monitoring, maintaining that accessibility over time. But definitely, we see a lot of situations where you budget out an audit, you budget out the remediation time. We typically try to look at like, if we're doing an audit and remediation, and if we're looking at $100,000 budget for a round number, and
Yep.
the audit's 20,000, 80,000 is probably like the remediation and the upgrade work.
Right.
That range is typically like 20 to 35, 20 to 33%, we'll say, for like overall budget is accessibility auditing and discovering issues, which leaves 67 to 80% for remediation work.
Yeah.
Um, and that can vary on a lot of factors, but we always want to make sure the client, when they're engaging with us, is thinking about the total project cost, so that we can scope the auditing cost, and they have the money to fix the issues. There's no point in having an audit without
Right.
a plan to fix the issues that the audit uncovers. But we find a lot of situations where you look at the overall budget and you say, hey, this is going to be, 30,000 to audit, and then that's going to give you 70,000 to remediate the issues at $100,000 for an overall budget. Should we just rip this thing out and
Right.
rebuild it better? Because $100,000, it's like having a car, right? It's having your
Yeah.
car is 15 years old, and at some point you bring it into the shop with a problem, and
Right.
you got to face the fact that it's not,
Not coming out of that shop.
you
Yeah.
don't want to replace the transmission for $5,000 on a $2,000 car. And
Right.
yeah, websites are the same way.
You made a good point about Google Analytics also, which I think is it's sometimes overlooked in
Yep.
these kind of situations where, the site, you might have 5,000 pages on the site. If you run that Google Analytics, 20% might be your traffic.
Right, right.
So there's an opportunity to go through and remove a lot of those, legacy pages, dead
Yep.
pages,
Yep.
and kind of just, reorganize and tighten up
Yep.
the messaging on the website,
Yep.
which will obviously help your ADA compliant because there's, less pages that need to be compliant
Yep.
overall.
Yep. Yeah, ripping stuff out, and like, you don't need to keep the thing for that one guy.
Right.
And it's covering twice. It's classic 80/20 rule where,
Yes. Yes.
80%, 20% of your pages are getting 80% of the traffic,
Yep.
80% of your pages are getting 20% of the traffic.
That's right.
Rip out the parts that nobody's visiting as a starting point.
Yeah.
All right,
100%.
Mike, we got to move to questions and answers. Gian's
Okay.
politely
Yeah, we've
prodding
got
us.